"Mom, he's my brother," said the millionaire's son, pointing to a street boy. The party hall went silent, and the silence was louder than the music. No one knew, but that secret buried for years was about to explode. And when the truth came to light, an entire family crumbled before everyone's eyes. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. The hall of the Anderson mansion buzzed with empty conversations and forced laughter. Crystals sparkled under the golden lights of the chandelier, while elegant guests circulated, with champagne flutes, celebrating another year of success for Robert Anderson's construction company. Among the impeccably dressed adults, an 8-year-old boy walked awkwardly, the navy blue suit looking like an uncomfortable costume on his small shoulders. Ethan sighed, observing the smiling faces that didn't reach their eyes. His mother, Emily, chatted animatedly with the high society ladies, but he knew that smile. It was the same one she used when taking her sleeping pills, trying to convince herself that everything was fine. Next to her, a blonde woman in a red dress gestured dramatically. Victoria, the sister-in-law, as she always introduced herself, although Ethan never quite understood what her exact relationship to the family was. The boy dodged a waiter balancing a tray of canapes and walked toward the glass doors leading to the garden. The air was heavy inside the house, impregnated with expensive perfumes and falsity. Outside, the evening breeze of Chicago brought momentary relief. Without anyone noticing, Ethan crossed the meticulously manicured garden and reached the front gate. The street, normally quiet in that upscale neighborhood, seemed different under the streetlights, more real somehow. He breathed deeply, feeling for the first time that night that he could just be a child. That's when he saw him. Across the street near a trash can was a boy, but not just any boy. It was as if Ethan were looking at a distorted mirror. The same face, the same brown eyes, the same nose shape. The difference was in everything else: the dirty skin, the torn clothes, the bare feet, and especially that look. A look that carried something that Ethan had never experienced: fear, distrust, hunger. The two stared at each other in absolute silence. Time seemed to stop, as if the universe needed a moment to process that impossibility. Ethan felt his heart race, a strange sensation spreading through his chest, as if something that had always been missing in his life had just materialized before him. The street boy took a hesitant step toward Ethan, eyes wide with surprise. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out. Ethan also tried to say something, anything, but the words got lost in his throat. "Ethan! Ethan, where are you?" Emily's voice cut through the night silence like a blade. The dirty boy was startled, and in a reflex turned and ran, disappearing into the shadows of the street. Ethan stood there motionless, watching that figure identical to him get lost. In the darkness, taking with him all the questions he didn't even know he had. "There you are." Emily appeared at the gate, relief evident in her voice. "I've been looking everywhere. What are you doing out here, my love?" Ethan looked at his mother, then at the empty street, and back at her. How to explain the inexplicable? How to tell her that he had just seen himself in a miserable version? Just wanted to get some air, Mom." Emily approached and placed her hand on his forehead, checking if he had a fever. Her eyes had that worried expression that Ethan knew well, the same one she made when she woke up in the middle of the night, sweaty and confused, murmuring things about dreams she couldn't remember. "Is everything okay? You seem different." Ethan nodded, but inside a silent revolution had begun. As he walked back to the house beside his mother, he couldn't stop thinking about what he had seen. Who was that boy? Why did they look so alike? And why, at the moment their eyes met, did Ethan feel as if a lost part of himself had been found? That night, after the last guests had gone, and the house returned to its habitual silence, Emily was preparing for bed when a familiar sensation invaded her. It was always like this. After social events, after smiling for hours on end, after pretending that everything in her life was perfect, the memories would return. Lying in the king-size bed she shared with Robert, she closed her eyes and was immediately transported to that day 8 years ago. The sensation of extra weight in her womb, the absolute certainty that she was carrying more than one life, the whispered conversations between Robert and the doctor that she was never part of the nebulous delivery, the drugs that left her too dizzy to understand what was happening, and then the emptiness. The emptiness of waking up with only one baby in her arms. For years, Robert had convinced her that it was just the pregnancy hormones, that her mind had created a fantasy. Pregnant women have these illusions, he would repeat whenever she mentioned her suspicions. You just wanted twins so badly that your brain invented this story. But Emily knew. Mothers know. Her body had housed 2 lives. She was sure of it. And now, seeing Ethan's strange behavior, that lost look he brought back from the street, something began to pulse differently in her chest. A restlessness she hadn't felt in a long time, as if a dormant part of her intuition was finally awakening. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, in a region where the lights were few and dreams even scarcer, another boy was trying to find a place to spend the night. Michael, a name he had chosen for himself at 5 when he realized no one else would, walked through the empty streets, still disturbed by the encounter that night. He knew that upscale area well. Sometimes, when hunger was too intense, he ventured there in search of food in the trash of the big houses. The rich threw away more food in one day than he saw in a week. But that night, he hadn't gone there because of hunger. There was something that pulled him to that street, a strange feeling he couldn't explain. And then he saw the boy in the suit, standing across the street, and it was like looking at himself through a portal to another dimension. The same face, but living a completely different life. Michael curled up in a doorway, pulling to himself the dirty blanket that was his only protection against the cold of the Chicago night. He closed his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. The image of the rich boy remained etched in his retina, and a question tormented him. Was it possible that he wasn't as alone in the world as he had always believed? The next day, Ethan woke up with the first ray of sunlight entering through his bedroom window. Unlike other mornings, he couldn't go back to sleep. The image of the street boy haunted him, and he knew he needed to tell someone. But who? His parents would certainly think he was making up stories. It was then that he remembered Madison, his best friend from school. Madison was different from the other children in his class. She had a natural curiosity and never doubted the strange. Things he sometimes told her. If anyone would take him seriously, it would be her. During recess, Ethan pulled Madison to a secluded corner of the schoolyard and told her everything. The girl's eyes widened as he described the encounter. Are you sure he looked exactly like you? Identical, Madison. Like he was my reflection, but different. He looked hungry, scared. Madison was thoughtful for a moment, biting her lip as she did when she was concentrating. My grandma always says there's no such thing as coincidence in the world. Maybe your distant relatives or... She hesitated, as if the idea was too big to be spoken aloud. Or maybe your brothers. The word echoed in Ethan's mind like a bell. Brothers. He had always wished for a brother, always felt that something was missing in his small, quiet family. What if Madison was right? We need to find him again, said Ethan, with a determination that surprised even himself. Madison nodded enthusiastically. Together, they began to devise a plan. They would tell their parents they needed to do a school project on different social realities in Chicago, which technically wasn't a lie. They would get someone to take them to that area, and then they would look for the mysterious boy. The opportunity arose when Ethan casually mentioned the school project to his mother. Emily, always concerned about her son's education, promptly offered help. I can ask Thomas to take you. He knows the whole city well. Thomas was the family's driver for more than 10 years, a quiet, middle-aged man who had always treated Ethan with paternal affection. If anyone would help them without asking too many questions, it would be him. When Ethan explained to Thomas what they needed to do, visit different neighborhoods in the city for the school project, the man readily agreed. But when, during the journey, Ethan began to describe the boy they had seen in a news report and would like to find to interview, something changed in Thomas's expression. The driver tensed, his hands gripped the steering wheel more tightly, and Ethan noticed that his eyes contracted in the rearview mirror, as if an uncomfortable memory had been awakened. But Thomas said nothing, just nodded and continued driving. They arrived in the area late in the afternoon, when the streets were beginning to fill with people returning from work. Ethan and Madison walked along the sidewalks beside Thomas, searching in every corner, in every group of children, in every shadow. The hours passed and frustration began to grow. That's when Madison shouted, "There!" Near a trash can, exactly like the night before, was the familiar figure. Michael was rummaging through the debris in search of something edible, unaware of the trio's approach. When he raised his head and saw Ethan, his eyes widened with surprise and fear. For a second, it seemed like he would flee again. But something in Ethan's look, perhaps the same desperate need for answers that he himself felt, made him stay. The two boys approached slowly, like two wild animals recognizing each other. When they stood face to face, the resemblance was even more impressive than Ethan remembered. It was as if someone had taken the same person and created two versions, one blessed by fortune, the other abandoned by it. "Hi," said Ethan, his voice coming out hoarser than intended. "Hi," Michael responded, wary. It was Madison who broke the awkward silence. "You two are identical. How is that possible?" Michael shrugged but didn't take his eyes off Ethan. "I don't know. I've never seen anyone who looked like me before." "Neither have I," murmured Ethan. Thomas, who had remained a few meters behind, approached slowly. When he saw Michael up close, his reaction was immediate and impossible to hide. He turned pale, put his hand to his chest, and needed to lean against the car. "Thomas, are you okay?" asked Ethan, concerned. The driver looked at him, then at Michael, then back at Ethan. His voice came out trembling when he finally spoke. "Boys, tell me something. Do you have any identical marks? Anything that's exactly the same on both of you?" Ethan frowned, not understanding the question. Michael, in turn, automatically raised his right hand, showing a small crescent-shaped birthmark on his wrist. Ethan's heart raced. Slowly, he raised his own right hand. There, in the exact same spot was the same mark, identical, unmistakable. Madison gasped. Thomas closed his eyes for a long moment, as if gathering courage to face a truth he had known for a long time. The silence that followed the discovery of the identical marks was broken only by the sound of distant traffic. Thomas opened his eyes slowly, and Ethan had never seen such a burdened expression on the driver's face. It was as if years of kept secrets were fighting to come out all at once. I need to take you home now," said Thomas, his voice still trembling. "And you two," he looked at Ethan and Michael alternately, "you need to come with me." Michael instinctively backed away. Life on the streets had taught him to distrust adults, especially those who seemed to have authority. But something in Thomas's gaze wasn't threatening. It was broken, as if he carried an old guilt that finally had an opportunity to be repaired. "I'm not going anywhere," Michael said, with the hardness of someone who learned to defend himself too early. Ethan approached him, moved by an instinct he didn't completely understand. "Please, I think we're brothers. Don't you feel it too?" Michael stared at him for a long moment. Yes, he felt it. Since he first saw Ethan, a strange sensation had been consuming him, as if an empty part of his chest was being filled. But admitting this meant accepting that he had lost 8 years living alone when he could have had a family. Madison, sensing the tension, interjected with her child's wisdom. "Look, if you really are brothers, that's incredible. It means you found each other because it was meant to happen. The universe wanted it that way." During the journey back to the mansion, Thomas drove in silence, clearly battling an internal struggle. Ethan observed Michael through the rearview mirror, seeing how he looked impressed by the neighborhoods that gradually changed, from the simple streets to the middle-class condominiums, and finally to the high walls and electronic gates of the upscale zone. When they arrived at the Anderson house, Michael hesitated before getting out of the car. That mansion represented everything he never had, everything that life had denied him. Being there was like visiting a parallel world where an alternative version of himself had grown up. Emily was in the garden watering the orchids, when she saw the car stop. She expected to see only Ethan and Madison, but when a third figure emerged from the back seat, the watering can slipped from her hands and shattered on the ground. Time stopped. Emily looked at Michael and felt something visceral move inside her, as if every cell in her body recognized that boy. It wasn't just the physical similarities with Ethan. It was something deeper, more primitive. It was a mother's recognition of a child she knew she had carried in her womb. Emily's legs weakened. She leaned against the windowsill, her breathing accelerated, her heart beating so hard she could hear it in her ears. Tears began to roll down her face without her noticing. "My God," she murmured, and her voice came out as a broken whisper. "My God, I knew it. I always knew." Ethan ran to her, frightened by his mother's reaction. "Mum, are you okay?" Emily looked at her son, then at Michael, who remained several meters away, clearly uncomfortable with all that show of emotion. She wanted to run to him, hug him, make up for all the lost years, but something in the boy's distrustful look warned her to go slow. "What's your name?" she asked, trying to control her voice. "Michael," he answered, stiffening his body as if preparing to flee at any moment. "Michael," she repeated, savoring the name. "That's a beautiful name." It was at that moment that Robert arrived home from work. He parked his car in the garage and walked toward the group in the garden, frowning at the unusual scene. His wife clearly shaken, a strange, dirty and poorly dressed child, Thomas with a serious expression he had never seen before. "What's going on here?" asked Robert, his tone already laden with authority and impatience. When his eyes fell on Michael, Robert turned pale. For a fraction of a second, his mask of control slipped, and an expression of pure terror crossed his face. He quickly composed himself, but Emily noticed, Ethan noticed, and especially Thomas noticed. "Emily, take Ethan inside now," ordered Robert, his voice icy. "No," said Ethan, surprising everyone with his firmness. "I'm not going anywhere. This is my brother, and if you don't want him to stay here, then I'll leave with him." Robert looked at his son as if he didn't recognize him. This was the first time Ethan had openly defied him, and the determination in the boy's eyes was unwavering. "Brother?" Robert laughed, but it was a forced, nervous laugh. "What nonsense is this, Ethan? This boy is a beggar you brought from the street." "A beggar who has the same birthmark as your son," Thomas intervened, his voice laden with decades of silent observation. "A mark I saw the day he was born, Mr. Anderson. The day they were born." The atmosphere became electrically tense. Robert stared at Thomas with barely contained fury, while Emily felt the pieces of an 8-year puzzle finally fitting together. "I don't know what you're talking about," said Robert, but his voice carried no conviction. "I know more than you imagine, sir," replied Thomas, taking a step forward. "I saw the whispered conversations, the strange phone calls, the visits from people who weren't doctors. I drove you to places that weren't clinics. And I kept quiet because I needed the job, because I had my own family to support. But now, seeing these boys together, I can no longer remain silent." At that moment, Victoria appeared at the entrance door, attracted by the commotion in the garden. When she saw Michael, her reaction was even more revealing than Robert's. She went livid, and automatically took 2 steps back, as if she had seen a ghost. "He can't be here," said Victoria, addressing Robert. "This will ruin everything." Emily turned to face her, a terrible suspicion beginning to take shape in her mind. "Ruin what, Victoria? What are you talking about?" Victoria realized her late mistake and tried to compose herself. I just don't think it's appropriate to bring unknown children into the house, Emily. You have to think about Ethan's safety." But Emily was no longer listening to the words. She was observing the faces, Robert's paleness, Victoria's poorly disguised desperation, Thomas's painful guilt. Everything was connected, and she finally understood that her mother's intuition had never been wrong. "Ethan," said Emily, her voice assuming a firmness she hadn't felt in years, "take Michael to your room. You two will stay there until I come." "Up." "Emily, I forbid it," Robert began. "You don't forbid anything," she interrupted him, turning to him with an authority that caught him by surprise. Not anymore. I need to talk to Thomas and Victoria. Now. Ethan held Michael's hand, a gesture that surprised the street boy, accustomed to not trusting anyone. Together they climbed the stairs of the mansion, leaving the adults in confrontation behind. In Ethan's room, Michael looked at everything with barely disguised amazement. The king-size bed, the huge wardrobe, the organized toys, the flat screen, TV. It was more concentrated luxury in one room than he had seen in his entire life. "Is it all yours?" he asked, carefully touching the surface of the desk. "Ours," corrected Ethan without thinking twice. "If you're my brother, then it's ours." Michael looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. No one had ever shared anything with him, much less offered half of everything they owned so naturally. Downstairs, the conversation between the adults quickly turned into confrontation. Emily demanded answers. Thomas was determined to tell the truth. Victoria tried to control the damage, and Robert oscillated between denying everything and threatening consequences. "I know you did something," said Emily, her voice laden with 8 years of repressed suspicions. "I know I carried 2 babies. I know my son has a brother. And I know you've been lying to me for 8 years. Thomas breathed deeply, as if preparing for a leap into the dark. "Mrs. Emily, there are things I've seen. Things I should never have seen. Conversations about money, about people who bought babies, about how to solve the problem of the twin pregnancy." Robert exploded. "You're making this up. You're trying to destroy my family." "Your family?" Emily laughed bitterly. "You destroyed our family 8 years ago when you decided that one of my children didn't deserve to live with us." The accusation hung in the air like a sentence. Victoria tried to intervene, but Emily silenced her with a look. "And you," said Emily, pointing at Victoria, "you always knew, didn't you? Always knew my son was alive, growing up alone on the streets, while you pretended to be my friend." Victoria opened her mouth to deny it, but the words didn't come out. Her face had lost all composure, revealing years of guilt and complicity. In the room, Ethan and Michael heard the echoes of the discussion coming from downstairs. They couldn't understand all the words, but the tone was clear. Secrets were being revealed, and their lives would never be the same. "Are you afraid?" asked Ethan. Michael considered the question. Fear was a familiar feeling for him. Fear of hunger, cold, dangerous people. But what he felt now was different. It was the fear of hoping for something good and being disappointed. "I'm always afraid," he admitted, "but this time it's different. It's like I'm afraid of being happy." Ethan nodded, understanding perfectly. He was afraid too, afraid of discovering that his father wasn't the man he thought he was, afraid that his perfect life had been built on lies, afraid of losing Michael after finally finding him. Downstairs, the truth was beginning to leak through the cracks of the carefully constructed facade, but there was still much to be revealed, and the consequences were only beginning to take shape. The days that followed the confrontation in the garden were the most tense in the history of the Anderson family. Robert had locked himself in his office taking urgent and whispered calls, while Victoria disappeared for 2 whole days, claiming to have traveled on business. Emily, for her part, could no longer pretend normalcy. Each look at Michael confirmed what her heart had always known, and each of Robert's attempts to remove the boy from the house only solidified her determination to discover the whole truth. Michael remained in the mansion in a strange situation. He wasn't exactly a guest, wasn't officially part of the family, but was no longer a stranger either. Ethan had insisted that his brother stay in his room, sharing not only the space, but also clothes, food, and Emily's attention, who alternated between moments of suffocating tenderness and melancholic pauses where she would just observe Michael. With tears in her eyes, Thomas had become a central figure during this period. After years of maintaining a complicit silence, he now seemed determined to repair the wrong. During his spare hours, he began gathering evidence, old documents that Robert thought he had destroyed, telephone call records, suspicious addresses he had noted during those strange months before the boy's birth. It was on a rainy Thursday that Victoria finally returned. She arrived at the mansion in a visibly altered state. Disheveled hair, smudged makeup, nails bitten until they bled. Emily found her in the kitchen, drinking coffee with trembling hands. "I need to talk to you," said Victoria, her voice laden with an almost desperate urgency. Emily sat at the kitchen table, studying the face of the woman she had considered a confidant for years. Now, looking with clarity, she could see signs that had always been there. The discomfort when the subject was Ethan's early years, the way she always changed the subject when Emily mentioned her dreams about twins, the suspicious closeness with Robert. "Then talk," said Emily, her voice cold as ice. Victoria swallowed hard and began to speak, the words coming out hurriedly, as if she was afraid of losing her courage. "Emily, you need to understand that none of this was my idea. I was young, I was in love, and Robert convinced me it was the only solution. He said you didn't have the financial means to raise 2 children, that the company was going through difficulties, that it would be better for everyone." Emily felt the blood freeze in her veins. "Continue." "The twin pregnancy was confirmed in the 5th month. Robert panicked. He was already in debt because of bad investments in the construction company, and the idea of another child, he said it was unsustainable. That's when he met those people through a client." "What people?" Victoria hesitated, tears beginning to roll. "People who facilitated irregular adoptions, people with a lot of money who couldn't have children and were willing to pay any amount for healthy babies. Robert saw an opportunity to solve 2 problems, the financial situation and what he called an excess of children." Emily rose from the chair abruptly, anger rising like volcanic lava. "You sold my son?" "It wasn't quite like that. The plan was for him to go to a good rich family that could give him everything you couldn't. Robert investigated the buyers. They were respectable people who—" "You sold my son," Emily shouted, her voice echoing through the entire house. Upstairs, Ethan and Michael heard the shout and looked at each other. Michael, who had begun to feel more comfortable in the house, immediately became tense again, ready to flee if necessary. "She's shouting because of me," said Michael, guilt tinging his voice. "No," Ethan held his brother's arm. "She's shouting because she discovered the truth. And the truth is that you should have been here all along." Victoria continued her confession between sobs. The birth was induced prematurely. Robert bribed the doctor and the nurses. "You were sedated more than necessary, Emily. When you woke up, they said one of the babies had complications." "And Michael? What happened to Michael?" "The transaction was supposed to take place 3 days after birth, but there was a police raid at the meeting place. The whole operation was discovered. Several people were arrested. Robert panicked and abandoned the baby." Emily had to lean on the sink to avoid falling. "You abandoned my 3-day-old son?" "Robert said there was no other option. If he was caught with the baby, the whole charade would be discovered. He left Michael in a basket at the door of an orphanage, believing someone would find him quickly. But Michael never reached the orphanage. No. Later we discovered that the basket was found by homeless people who took care of him for a few months before they couldn't anymore either. Michael ended up growing up on the streets, passing from person to person, never staying in the same place for long." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of rain hitting the windows. Emily looked at Victoria as if she was seeing a monster. "And you knew all this?" "I knew, Emily. I knew and kept quiet because I was in love with Robert. He promised he would leave you and be with me as soon as the situation stabilized. He said you would never need to know the truth, that it would be better for everyone." Emily laughed, a bitter and broken laugh. "Better for everyone, better for you, you mean? Meanwhile, my son grew up alone, going hungry, sleeping on the street, thinking he had no family in the world." At that moment, Robert entered the kitchen. His eyes were red from fatigue, and he seemed to have aged years in a few days. Seeing the 2 women, he immediately realized that his carefully constructed lie had finally crumbled. "Victoria, what have you done?" "I told the truth, Robert. I can't live with this weight anymore." Robert turned to Emily, still trying to salvage something from the situation. "Emily, you have to understand that—" "I don't have to understand anything." Emily exploded again. You sold my son. You made me believe I was crazy for 8 years. You destroyed our family and still had the audacity to pretend you were my friends." It was at this moment that Thomas appeared at the kitchen door, carrying a folder full of documents. His face was serious, determined. "Mrs. Emily, I have proof of everything she just told you. Names, addresses, phone records, and more. I just discovered that Robert used the money he would receive for the transaction to invest in the expansion of the construction company. All the family's financial success was built on the sale of your son." Robert turned pale. "Thomas, you don't know what you're getting into." "I know exactly what I'm getting into, and I also know that I've already contacted the proper authorities." The impact of the revelation was like a punch to the stomach for everyone present. Emily looked at Robert as if seeing him for the first time, not the husband she loved, but a stranger capable of the greatest atrocities. "The authorities?" asked Victoria, the panic evident in her voice. "Selling babies is a crime, Mrs. Victoria. Document falsification is a crime. Bribery is a crime. And child abandonment is a crime. Did you think you would get away with it forever?" Robert tried one last card. "Emily, think about Ethan. If this goes public, it will destroy our family. It will destroy your son's future." Emily looked at him with absolute contempt. "Our family was destroyed 8 years ago when you decided that one of my children didn't deserve to exist. And as for Ethan's future, he will finally have what he always should have had, a brother." Upstairs, the boys heard footsteps on the stairs. Emily appeared at the bedroom door, her face wet with tears but with an expression of relief they had never seen before. "Michael," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "My son. Forgive this mother for taking so long to find you." Michael looked at her, then at Ethan, then back at her. For 8 years he had dreamed of this moment, of someone who would love him unconditionally, who would want him close, who would call him son. But now that the moment had come, he didn't know how to react. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice small and vulnerable. "Are you sure I'm your son?" Emily approached him slowly, as if he were a frightened little animal that might run away at any moment. "My heart was sure the moment I saw you. My body recognized you immediately, and now my mind finally understands why I could never forget that I had carried 2 lives." She extended her arms, and after a moment of hesitation, Michael threw himself into them. It was an embrace of 8 years of waiting, of 8 years of unshed tears, of 8 years of bottled-up love. Ethan joined the embrace, and for the first time since they were born, the 3 were together as they should always have been. Downstairs, Robert and Victoria faced the arrival of the authorities that Thomas had contacted. The charade was over, and justice would finally come for all those involved in that tragedy that lasted 8 years. 6 months had passed since the day the truth finally came to light. The Anderson mansion had transformed into a completely different home, no longer quiet and formal, but full of voices, laughter, and, sometimes, typical arguments between brothers who were learning to live together after 8 years of separation. Robert had been sentenced and was serving time for child trafficking, document falsification, and child abandonment. Victoria, as an accomplice, also faced legal proceedings, but had cooperated with the authorities by providing information about the baby-selling network, which resulted in the arrest of several other people involved in the scheme. The scandal had been huge in the newspapers, but Emily decided to protect the boys from excessive exposure, temporarily moving to a smaller house in a more private neighborhood. Michael's adaptation to his new life hadn't been easy. 8 years, living on the streets had created deep defense mechanisms. He would wake up several times during the night, checking if the doors were locked, hiding food in his room, distrusting any show of affection. Weekly therapy with a psychologist specialized in childhood trauma helped, but the healing process was slow and delicate. Ethan, in turn, also faced his own challenges. The discovery that his entire privileged life had been built on his brother's suffering generated constant guilt. Besides that, sharing his mother's attention and learning to live with someone so different from him required patience and maturity that he didn't always manage to demonstrate. "Michael, you took my t-shirt." "Again!" Ethan complained on a Saturday morning, finding his brother wearing his favorite shirt. "So what? You said everything was ours." Michael responded with that defensive hardness that still emerged when he felt attacked. "I did say that, but that doesn't mean you can take my things without asking." Emily, who was preparing breakfast, sighed. These discussions were frequent, and she was still learning how to mediate conflicts between children raised in such distinct realities. "Boys," she intervened with patience. "Ethan, you can lend the shirt today. Michael, tomorrow you ask before taking it, okay?" Michael muttered something inaudible and left the kitchen. Ethan followed him, and Emily could hear them talking in a lower tone in the hallway. Moments later, they returned together, Ethan offering a different shirt for Michael to choose from. These small steps of progress filled Emily's heart with hope. Each passing day, she saw the boys getting to know each other better, creating their own games, developing the complicity of brothers. Michael was learning to trust, and Ethan was learning to share not only material goods, but also emotional space. Thomas had become much more than a driver. He was now officially the family's property manager and, informally, a father figure for the boys. His courage in revealing the truth had created a special bond with all of them. Emily had begun to notice qualities in him that had always been there, but that she had never noticed during the troubled years of marriage with Robert. "Mrs. Emily," said Thomas on a Sunday afternoon while the boys played in the yard, "are you sure you want to keep the house? The bad memories." Emily looked out the window, seeing Ethan teaching Michael to ride a bicycle. The boy who grew up on the streets was determined to learn everything he had missed, and Ethan was proving to be a patient and dedicated teacher. "The bad memories are part of our history, Thomas, but now we're creating good ones. Michael needs stability, a place he can call home without fear of having to run away." Thomas nodded, admiring this woman's strength. "And what about the official adoption process?" "The judge said it will just be a formality. Michael is my biological son, so it's just a matter of fixing the documentation. He'll have the full family name, corrected birth certificate. Everything that was stolen from him will be returned." A few days later, the day of the final hearing arrived. Michael wore a navy blue suit, identical to what Ethan had worn at the party 8 months ago where it all began. The boys were nervous but also eager for that bureaucratic chapter to be closed. The judge, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, smiled, seeing the boys seated side by side at the hearing. "Michael," he said, "do you understand what it means to be officially recognized as Michael Anderson?" Michael nodded solemnly. "It means I have a real family. It means I belong somewhere." "And do you want that?" "More than anything in the world." When the judge's gavel struck the table, officially correcting the documents, Michael finally allowed himself to cry. They weren't tears of sadness, but of absolute relief. Ethan held his hand, and Emily enveloped them in an embrace that seemed to want to make up for all the embraces lost over those 8 years. Later, at the celebration party they organized at home, small and intimate, just with Madison and her family, Thomas, and some neighbors who had become friends, Michael made a point of giving a speech. "I want to thank you," he began, his voice still timid but firm, "for finding me. I always knew something was missing in my life, but I didn't know what it was. Now I know it was you. It was having a mother who loves me, a brother who teaches me new things every day, and a family that will never leave me alone again." Emily had to step away for a moment to cry in private. Thomas followed her to the porch, offering a handkerchief and his silent presence. "She did it," he said, watching the boys playing with Madison in the garden. "She managed to bring the children back." "We did it," corrected Emily, looking at him with gratitude. "If you hadn't had the courage—" "It was the right thing to do. I should have done it a long time ago." They remained in silence for a moment, observing the children. There was something unspoken between them, a closeness that had developed naturally over those difficult months. Emily had learned to value men of character, who did what was right even when it cost dearly. "Thomas," she said hesitantly, "would you like to have dinner here tomorrow? Just us, I mean the 4 of us." He smiled, understanding perfectly the invitation. "It would be an honor, Emily." A year later, life had found a new balance. Michael attended school regularly, and despite still having difficulties with some subjects because of the lost years, was developing rapidly. His unique personality, a mixture of survivor's toughness with a child's sweetness, enriched the family in unexpected ways. Ethan had become a more sensitive boy, more aware of the inequalities in the world. He frequently asked to visit institutions that cared for street children, taking donations and mainly his story of hope. Emily and Thomas had made their relationship official, but without rushing. Both understood that the priority was the boy's stability, and any change needed to be made with care and respect for everyone's feelings. On a December evening, as they prepared the house for Christmas, the first complete Christmas of the reunited family, Michael asked a question that had been kept for months. "Mom, can you tell me what it was like when we were born? The true story." Emily sat between her two sons on the sofa, Ethan on one side, Michael on the other, and began to tell. She told about the pregnancy, about how she felt she was carrying two souls, about the dreams she had during those months, about the immense love she felt the moment she knew they were twins. "You were wanted from the very first second," she said, kissing each one's forehead. "And even when you were separated, you were never stopped being loved. A mother's love doesn't get lost, doesn't divide, doesn't diminish. It just waits for the right moment to be fully lived." Michael nestled in his mother's lap as he had never been able to do when he arrived in the family. Now, a year later, he had finally learned to receive affection without fear that it would go away. "And now?" asked Ethan. "Now that we're all together, what's going to happen?" Emily smiled, looking at her two sons and at Thomas, who was watching them from the living room door with a smile full of love. "Now we're going to live," she said simply. "We're going to live each day as a celebration of being together. We're going to live like a real family, with joys and sorrows, fights and reconciliations, but always, always together." Outside it began to rain, but it was no longer the rain of separation and suffering. It was the rain of renewal, of cleansing, of new beginnings. And inside that house, 4 hearts beat in the same rhythm, finally complete, finally home. The story of Michael and Ethan had begun in the same womb, was interrupted by 8 years of injustice, but now began again with the strength of maternal love that never gives up, the loyalty of those who do what is right, and the magic of family bonds that no cruelty can break forever. The end of the story. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Emily, Ethan, and Michael has deeply touched your hearts, just as it touched ours in narrating it. This is a story about never giving up on love, about the strength of maternal intuition, and about how the truth, even when painful, always liberates. To continue this emotional journey with us, we've prepared a special playlist with equally touching and transformative stories. You can find it by clicking here beside. If this narrative moved you as much as we hoped, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like on the video. This helps us continue bringing stories that celebrate the complexity and beauty of human life. Every day we bring unique content that explores the deepest family feelings and the bonds that connect us to one another. Don't miss our upcoming releases and tell us in the comments, have you ever experienced a situation where maternal or paternal intuition was stronger than all contrary evidence? We're eager to read your experiences,